Let's take a journey back to the early 1900s, when the world met one of the most fearsome predators to ever walk the earth, Tyrannosaurus rex. But here's the twist. The dinosaur we know today started out as a mysterious jigsaw puzzle made of just a few giant bones. In 1902, deep in the Badlands of Montana's Hell Creek Formation, paleontologists Barnum Brown and Richard Lull unearthed a discovery that would change prehistoric science forever. 36 enormous bones, including part of a jaw, a towering thigh bone, some vertebrae, and a chunk of the pelvis. These remains hinted at something massive and terrifying. When Henry Fairfield Osborn got his hands on the fossils, he didn't hesitate. He named the beast Tyrannosaurus, or tyrant lizard, because this thing was far bigger than any land predator known at the time. And in a world where dinosaurs were just beginning to be pieced together, this was like finding the king. Fast forward to 1905, and Osborn's colleague William D. Matthews stepped up to do what no one had done before: create the first visual reconstruction of T. That early drawing showed a creature standing tall and upright, with a long tail dragging on the ground and tiny, almost useless arms. Sure, by today's standards it looks clunky, but back then, it was cutting-edge science. And here's something clever about that drawing. They shaded the bones they actually had, just a handful. Everything else? An educated guess pulled from what scientists knew about other dinosaurs. The hips, tail, even parts of the torso were speculative. Early paleontology was a mix of detective work and imagination, and this was one of its boldest guesses. What's even more fascinating is that the illustrators chose to include that famously tiny arm, and got it right. At a glance, it could have been mistaken for the limb of a baby dinosaur, or a completely different species, but somehow, they figured out it belonged to the same fearsome animal. That first sketch may not look much like the sleek predator we imagine today, but it was a milestone. With just a fraction of a skeleton, these early scientists captured the essence of a creature that would go on to become a prehistoric icon. And they did it with more intuition and boldness than most people realize. It's wild to think about, but early paleontologists managed to piece together the bizarre anatomy of Tyrannosaurus rex, those tiny arms paired with massive bones, and still made sense of what kind of animal it might have been. By 1906, Henry Fairfield Osborn continued refining his understanding of T-Rex. That same year, artist L.M. Sterling produced a more advanced version of the original skeletal illustration. While the pose remained similar, the artwork itself took a big leap forward in detail and precision. Sterling used a classic anatomical style that brought more clarity and accuracy to what was known at the time. You can tell the bones were now scaled more thoughtfully against each other, likely the result of spending months up close with the fossils. This wasn't just a basic diagram anymore. It was a more careful attempt to highlight what parts of the dinosaur were known from real bones and what parts had to be filled in based on logical inference. But as remarkable as skeletons are, they're only half the story. What really captures the imagination is how people envisioned the living, breathing creature, what it looked like with muscles, skin, and other features layered over those bones. It wasn't until 1916 that the American Museum of Natural History commissioned legendary paleo artist Charles R. Knight to bring T-Rex to life in full color. And the result? An absolute classic. Knight is still revered today by paleo artists for the way he blended science with imagination. In his painting, T-Rex was portrayed as a towering reptilian monster, heavily influenced by the large lizards we know today. Take a closer look, and you'll see features borrowed straight from iguanas. The way the lips are drawn, the oversized cheek scales, even the greenish tones and striped tail. At the time, this made perfect sense. Reptiles were the living comparison, and artists leaned into that visual connection. Of course, the artwork wasn't without its flaws. Knight, basing T-Rex's hand structure on other similar dinosaurs, gave it an extra finger. That might sound like a small mistake, but it shows how much guesswork was still involved in reconstructing these ancient animals. Despite that error, the painting became a sensation. Coming up next, dinosaurs hit Hollywood, and T-Rex takes its first steps onto the silver screen. The first cinematic appearance of Tyrannosaurus rex came in 1918 with The Ghost of Slumber Mountain, a pioneering stop-motion film that brought prehistoric creatures to life on the silver screen. Audiences were treated to scenes of triceratops roaming the landscape, bumping into things with their massive horns, and, of course, the unmistakable silhouette of a T-Rex lumbering across the screen, tail dragging behind, moving with the slow, deliberate power of a heavyweight predator. The animation even included a moment where the T-Rex appeared to lick its chops, adding a touch of personality. But here's where science steps in. That detail, while charming, is a bit of a stretch. The bone responsible for tongue movement, the hyoid, has been found in one of T-Rex's close relatives. Studies of that structure suggest these dinosaurs likely couldn't stick their tongues out. Instead, the tongue was mostly used for internal movement, like gripping prey or guiding food down the throat, not for dramatic lip licking. Despite that creative liberty, The Ghost of Slumber Mountain was a huge success. It pulled in around $100,000 at the box office on a budget of just $3,000. A massive return on investment. The equivalent of turning $60,000 into over $2 million in today's dollars? And the star of the show? No doubt, it was Tyrannosaurus Rex. This film solidified T-Rex's place in pop culture as a cinematic monster. Afterward, T-Rex showed up in a few smaller productions, but its true breakout moment came in 1933 with the release of King Kong. Now we're talking blockbuster territory. In this film, T-Rex is rendered with stunning detail for the time. Its skin textured, almost like a crocodile, a shift from earlier iguana-like portrayals. This design likely reflected the growing understanding that crocodilians shared some ancient lineage with dinosaurs. One of the film's most unforgettable scenes, a brutal battle where King Kong wrestles with a T-Rex, ultimately prying open its jaws in dramatic fashion. For many moviegoers around the world, this scene became the definitive image of T-Rex. Without access to scientific journals or museums like the American Museum of Natural History, the general public relied on films like this to visualize prehistoric life. And what they saw stuck. King Kong wasn't just a hit, it was a financial juggernaut. With a budget of around $600,000, it grossed nearly $10 million, which today would equal a staggering $250 million. It proved that dinosaurs weren't just museum relics, they were box office gold. And just when it seemed like the bar couldn't be raised any higher, Walt Disney himself would take the stage in 1942, redefine the world of dinosaur animation. Disney's Fantasia, for many, this wasn't just a movie, it was a childhood obsession. What made it stand out was that, for the first time in a major animated film, Disney brought in an actual paleontologist to help shape how the dinosaurs moved, looked, and interacted. The result? A sequence that felt alive, dynamic, and a major step forward in prehistoric storytelling. Look at those enormous sauropods lumbering across the landscape. The animation captured a sense of weight and power, unlike anything before. But scientifically speaking, the film also took a few liberties. The scene throws a mix of species together in an all-out prehistoric showdown, even though many of these animals never shared the same era, or even the same continent. Here's a fun fact to put that in perspective. Humans today are closer in time to T-Rex than T-Rex was to Stegosaurus. Yet in Fantasia, they're locked in battle like old rivals. It's dramatic and thrilling, but scientifically impossible. As for the T-Rex in Fantasia, he kept the familiar green, upright, tail-dragging look, but there was a notable shift. Gone were the scaly lips borrowed from iguana. This version showed its teeth constantly, giving the creature a more menacing, almost skeletal grin. It was the first time audiences saw a T-Rex portrayed without lips, with its teeth permanently exposed, which added to its fierce image. Around the same time, another landmark in Paylord emerged. Rudolf Zallinger's massive mural, The Age of Reptiles, painted for the Yale Peabody Museum. His depiction of T-Rex was majestic but dated, showing the dinosaur as a slow-moving, almost bloated, lizard-like beast with a low-hanging tail. It had massive legs, a powerful presence, and a belly that looked more balloon than brute. Despite the inaccuracies, Zallinger's mural became iconic and charming in its own right, but Paylord didn't stop evolving. Also during this era, Charles R. Knight returned to the scene with a new painting that asked a bold question: what's the most epic dinosaur moment imaginable? His answer: two T-Rexes locked in combat. This version pushed the dinosaur's image forward, showing them in more dynamic poses, less like sluggish giants, and more like active predators. However, some details were still off. One standout is the exaggerated whip-like tails curling behind them. At that point in history, a complete T-Rex tail hadn't been discovered yet, so Knight and his contemporaries filled in the gaps with imagination. Today, we know the tail was more rigid and muscular, built for balance, not for snapping like a bullwhip. Still, that painting, like helped shape the public's perception of Tyrannosaurus Rex, not just as a fossil, but as a living, breathing, battling beast worthy of the silver screen and the grandest murals. For decades, the public image of Tyrannosaurus Rex didn't change much. Still upright, still tail-dragging, still built like a prehistoric kangaroo. But all of that began to shift in the 1970s, during a scientific revolution known as the Dinosaur Renaissance. It was paleontologist John Ostrom who kicked off this new era by challenging the idea that dinosaurs were just oversized, cold-blooded reptiles. He proposed that they were more agile, intelligent, and closely related to birds than anyone had seriously considered before. He even suggested that they might have lived in social groups, something rare among today's reptiles. Then came Robert Bakker, another visionary, who took it a step further. He argued that dinosaurs were warm-blooded, fast-moving animals, not the slow, swamp-dwelling giants they'd been made out to be. These radical new theories laid the groundwork for a quiet little novel that exploded into pop culture: Jurassic Park. When Jurassic Park hit theaters in 1993, it didn't just entertain, it redefined how the world saw dinosaurs. Suddenly, these creatures weren't just lumbering monsters. They were alert, calculating, and terrifyingly fast. T-Rex was still a Hollywood star, but now it had a brain to match its bite. The film also reflected the scientific debates happening at the time, especially when it came to T-Rex's appearance. In the movie, Its mouth had a fleshy rim, maybe even what you could call lips. Gone were the permanently exposed crocodile-like teeth. This detail hinted at a new line of thinking, that maybe T-Rex didn't walk around with a mouth full of visible fangs after all. That cinematic version of T-Rex, fast, smart, and imposing, has stuck in the public consciousness for decades, and it's no surprise, it looked incredible. The film also happened to come out shortly after two of the most complete T-Rex skeletons were discovered, Wankel and Sue. These fossils offered more anatomical clarity than ever before and helped fuel the movie's realism. But as more biomechanical studies rolled in, scientists realized something important. Maybe we'd gone a little too far. Yes, T-Rex was built for power, but it wasn't exactly built for speed. Studies showed that it probably moved with its body held horizontally, more like a capital T. And while strong, it wasn't the acrobatic predator Hollywood made it out to be. Then, in 1999, the BBC raised the bar with Walking with Dinosaurs. This groundbreaking series treated dinosaurs not as monsters, but as animals, real, complex creatures with daily lives. The T-Rex featured in the show was shown battling Ankylosaurus in what was likely the Hell Creek Formation, staying true to the known fossil record. What made this documentary revolutionary wasn't just the visual effects, it was the approach. The series adopted the tone and structure of a traditional wildlife documentary, framing T-Rex the same way we'd observe lions on African plains. It was a blend of science and storytelling that helped viewers see dinosaurs not just as creatures from the past, but as once living animals that deserved the same biological depth we give to modern wildlife. Jumping ahead to 2023, we arrive at Apple TV's Prehistoric Planet 2, a series that boldly reimagined the king of dinosaurs in a way that mainstream media had barely touched before. This time, Tyrannosaurus rex isn't just colossal, it's fuzzy. What sets this portrayal apart is that it isn't trying to scare audiences with a movie monster. Instead, it presents T-Rex as what it really was, a living, breathing animal with complex behaviors. And that, for many viewers, is even more fascinating than a creature designed only to destroy. The inspiration for giving T-Rex feathers traces back to a scientific milestone in 19 when a small theropod called Sin. Not long after, discoveries like Caudipteryx and Protocheptery added to the evidence, showing that feather-like structures were widespread among theropods, especially in smaller species. These feathers likely weren't for flying, but for keeping warm, which made perfect sense for small-bodied dinosaurs that needed help regulating temperature. Then came a major breakthrough in 2012, the discovery of Uterinus, a large theropod closely related to T, with clear evidence of feather coverings similar to those seen in modern emus. This discovery added serious weight to the idea that T-Rex itself could have sported feathers, at least in some parts of its body, or perhaps during its youth. Since then, scientists have debated the feathered T-Rex idea from all angles. One camp argues that smaller tyrannosaurs almost certainly had feathers, but as they evolved into massive apex predators, their need for insulation may have disappeared, similar to how larger mammals today don't always need thick fur. However, other evidence complicates the picture. It's plausible they had some feathering, possibly as juveniles or in patches on certain parts of the body. With so many of its relatives sporting fuzz, it would be strange if T-Rex didn't have any at all. While that question remains open, one thing we have started to figure out is the great lips or no lips debate, and that's a whole new chapter in how we imagine the dinosaurs. Today, we can say with growing confidence that Tyrannosaurus rex likely didn't have constantly exposed teeth like a crocodile. In 2023, a landmark study published in Science by Cullen and colleagues examined how tooth enamel develops in both extinct dinosaurs and living animals. Their findings pointed to something important. Enamel is sensitive. It degrades when exposed to open air for long periods. That suggests that T-Rex probably had lips or at least a protective layer of tissue to keep its teeth sealed in a moist environment, bathed in saliva. One of the more striking recent reconstructions of T-Rex comes from a specimen nicknamed Black Beauty, a well-preserved fossil discovered in Canada. Its bones are a deep, glossy black due to mineralization, giving it its dramatic name. This reconstruction was created for the Fukui Prefectural Dinosaur Museum in Japan, as part of an exhibit exploring the dinosaurs of North America's Cretaceous period. In this depiction, the design follows updated science without opting for feathers, something that remains a scientifically acceptable choice for now, since we still don't have definitive evidence for or against full-body feathering in adult T. What we do know is that modern reconstructions differ dramatically from the early 1900s. Posture is one of the most obvious updates. The dinosaur is positioned horizontally, its center of mass balanced over powerful hips, with a tail that acts as a counterweight to the head. Unlike the outdated tripod stance, with a tail dragging along the ground, this version reflects the muscular strength and rigidity of the tail, an organ of both balance and motion. Cross-sections of the tail show around powerful structure, not the flat, weak-looking tails of old restorations. And just this past week in 2025, BBC Earth released a brand new episode of Walking with Dinosaurs, presenting the most modern interpretation of T-Rex yet. This isn't a roaring monster, It's portrayed like a real animal. Its mouth is gently closed, showing off lips that likely sealed in the teeth. And the skin is detailed with patches of keratin over the brows and textured integument across the skull. And while T-Rex may be the best-known dinosaur on the planet, the truth is, the research never stops. There's still plenty of debate about its appearance, scales versus feathers, lips versus exposed teeth, and evidence continues to emerge. To really dig into all of it would take days, maybe weeks. What we've shared here is a snapshot, a fast track through more than a century of discovery, debate, and imagination. Click on the video on your screen to keep enjoying our content. See you in the next video.